Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the completeness of the pagan worldview as opposed to the Christian worldview. So the general idea of what I'll be talking about is that the Christian worldview speaks mostly about a thou shalt, about rules which need to be followed, whilst not actually offering a lot of wisdom regarding life situations, how best to act on a I'd say non-spiritual, but of course you could argue it's still spiritual. Living the right ways is always a spiritual task, but it does not offer a relative degree of wisdom regarding the human environment, challenges which human beings face daily, and how to choose the right path and how to make the right choices in life. Well, paganism, in my opinion, does offer this. So, just trying to find an angle the sun will shine on my face. So I'll give a few examples from Greek mythology, because Greek mythology is not necessarily the most complete or the best or the most advanced form of pagan. It's not the most advanced pagan worldview necessarily, but it is definitely the most well preserved, and that's because it was written about, and the pagans in Greece wrote down their works over many centuries, while in other pagan circles were mostly pre-civilized, or else their civilization didn't last that long, or they didn't write so much. Not as much of it was preserved. And in Greek mythology we have a myriad of different examples from which wisdom regarding life can be gained, which is not gained in Christianity. The first example I'll give is the example of, say, Hercules, when he travels back from his 12 labours, and Atlas, who is holding up the world on his shoulders, says to Hercules, "Will you take this globe off me for a while, because the weight is so heavy?" And Hercules, who is the archetype of the hero, overladen with burdens, who yet overcomes them all and returns victorious. Hercules, of course, agrees, and Atlas tricks him and runs off and doesn't come back. And this is a very clear metaphor for how there is never really a limit to the labours which the heroic man will go through. There will always be one more. There will always be one more task, and people will take advantage of the strong and of the strongest types in the society to put all the burdens on them. And I'm sure that many of you will have felt this at some time in your life, that it's never really just a task that you're dealt which are enough. There's always something more. There's always something more which a decent, honourable person will have to go through. The struggle is never ending for someone someone for whom struggle is a way of life. The second example I'll give is let's see. I forgot the second example, but I'll give another example, which is that of Venus and Mars. Now, as a story, Venus, of course, being Hephaestion's wife, or Vulcan. I'll use the Roman name, so let's say Vulcan. And Venus, rather than Aphrodite, was having trysts with Mars, the god of war. And one of these times, Vulcan made a net of invisible threads so thin that no one could see them. And while they were making love, he cast it over them to trap them. And they were sort of caught in this invisible net, the goddess of love, the god of war. And I think it's a metaphor here for the intrinsic tie between love and war, between say the feminine and the masculine arts. Because if we were to take sex as a symbol, there are two things which are represented here. One is, of course, passion, and the other is procreation. And so there is an obvious message here that the marriage between between conflict and romance both accentuates both of these things, empowers both of these things, and is necessary for some sort of procreation of a spiritual sort, of the creation of something new and better, of imbuing yourself into that which comes after you. And much in the same way that love is necessary to bear children, because it's necessary for marriage, war is necessary for the birth of nations. And so war is also a procreative act, just as much as love. And you could also add that because Venus was cheating on her husband while doing this, that it was also an act of conflict for her. So just as much as Mars, for Mars it was passion, for Venus it was also conflict. And so again, it's this marriage between love and war, which is necessary for people as well as tribes and nations to exist. And to give another example from Greek mythology, just to clarify this, the completeness of the worldview here, I'll give the example of Odysseus in the Odyssey. After 10 years in the Trojan War, he gets trapped on the island of Calypso, and he basically becomes Calypso's sex slave for 7 years. And this is the opening of the Odyssey, at least where Odysseus' story comes in. And I think this is, again, a very obvious symbol. So Odysseus, this resourceful hero, basically becomes caught up in a loveless sexual relationship with a woman in which he's entrapped. He's basically a slave. And it's again a very obvious example of the trap which a successful man, or a man who struggled and strived and achieved great things, would fall into. Particularly the archetype of a soldier in ancient times would have probably fallen into this trap quite commonly. And it's, in a sense, it's a weakening force. It's a debilitating force. And again, it's a very obvious, clear metaphor for how the softness and comfort of a woman can weaken a soldier's heart and mind and body, and that it's necessary to somehow escape from this. Again, those 7 years Odysseus spent were wasted. He did nothing of value, as valuable as his life was. In Christianity, just to circle back to that, to Christianity, there's again all these stories about what you should do. There's this concept of virtue and sin. Now, in paganism, there's obviously an idea of virtue and sin, but in addition, most of how you should act in paganism is really to be extrapolated by the individual and by the society itself. And the fact that most tribes and nations came to the same conclusions, it speaks more about the objective reality regarding a healthy way of living than it does to an actual sort of overwhelming sort of moral law. So obviously in most pagan cultures there were laws against incest and things like that. But again, you will find that in not just in Europe, you'll find that everywhere. And so there are two different sort of sets of laws. There's like the natural sort of human law, then there's the cultural law on top of that. So if you look at connections between like the law codes of ancient Greece and ancient Ireland or ancient India, then yeah, you'll find like a cultural connection there. But generally there's most of the pagan teachings are about simply a healthy, natural way of life. The stories are full of wisdom because they represent archetypes of humanity which are as ancient as humanity itself, probably, in many cases anyway. And a lot of the correct way of life, the correct way of living, to be honourable, to be true to yourself, to be strong-willed. This is to be extrapolated from stories which are basically pieces of wisdom, rather than a submissive following of an order, of a thou shalt, which is what there is in Christianity. And therefore, it's from this means that the majority of, so let's say, the rules and the orders in paganism actually end up being a lot healthier than those in Christianity, because often a Christian will prevent himself from doing something which is good for him, purely because it's part of these sins, part of these injustices against God, which are in some way. If you were to take, for example, a career criminal, might feel a lot less guilty than a devout priest, because a career criminal did everything that he did, good or bad, he did for personal gain, or because he needed to survive, or something like that. He would have some justification for it, and so his soul would be clean in a sense. He'd be free of guilt. He lived in accordance with his will, even if you were to say it's bad to be a criminal, of course, from an outside perspective, from a social perspective, but a priest, for example, someone who devoutly follows his religion, will remember the tiny discrepancies he made if he drank alcohol, if he had unclean thoughts, or something like that. And he will feel immense guilt about this. He'll think he's going to hell. And ultimately, if we are to objectively evaluate the quality of man which both of these systems produce, as nice it would be if everyone were to simply follow the rules completely and be as forcefully pleasant as possible, as the Christians want. The caliber and the quality of the stock of mankind produced by paganism is far greater, and as unruly and wild as the barbarian man may be, from a spiritual perspective, he is healthier than, I say, even the most devout of priests and Christians whose religion is their meaning in life. That's the point I wanted to make. The completeness of the pagan worldview.